Hey everyone, Taco here and I hope you're doing well. And in this video, I wanted to share with you a few images that I took from the latest snowstorm we had in our city and how I used shutter speed to add texture to my images. So let's begin. To give you an idea of how intense this snowstorm was, it was probably about minus 12 to 15 degrees Celsius by lakeshore along Lake Ontario. We had very windy conditions with wind gusts of up to 20 to 30 kilometers an hour and probably even stronger right by the lakeshore as well. With the strong winds, you can see how the snow is now actually snowing horizontally instead of vertically. And it got so cold that my fingers and toes were actually pretty numb by the first 30 minutes of my walking out in the park. I took a lot of photos and I'll share some of those with you at the end of this video, but there's two specific photos that I wanted to talk about today in this video, and so let's go to my computer and look at those photos right now. Now I'm going to give you an overview of the first image and then give you an overview of the second image before I go into the details of each of the images. So this particular image, you might think that it is a typical winter scenery, and it probably is what you would expect from a major winter storm. So you can see the intensity of the storm because in the foreground the trees are visible, but then as you go further into the background, the trees get lighter and lighter and they eventually fade into white. So that adds a little bit extra depth thanks to the intensity of the storm. And in the shadow areas where the tree trunks are, you can probably see the individual snowflakes that are adding a little bit of texture to the trees as well. So this shot was taken at 1/500th of a second, and my intention was to capture the individual snowflakes. Now, let's go into the second shot where all I did was it's the exact same composition, but I changed the shutter speed. So now you can see the difference, besides the fact that a runner actually passed through my frame at this very moment. So you can see now the intensity of the storm is exactly the same, but now if you look at the shadow areas and probably the mid-tone areas as well, you'll be able to see some of the streaking that's going on there. And I'll show you a little bit in more detail just in a little moment, but I just want you to appreciate this entire image as it is and as it differs from the original image that I showed you at. So this again was taken at 1/30th of a second in order to be able to bring in a little bit of motion into the snow falling, and then just by happenstance when I was there the runner was actually passing by from left to right, so I did intentionally try to frame the runner right beside the bench, and I love the fact that the runner was going just the right amount of speed so that at 1/30th of a second it managed to blur the runner as well as the snow in the shadow areas. Let's go look into the details now. I'm going to actually switch back to the original image at 1/500th of a second. Right here, and let's go look at 100%, and we'll be able to appreciate more of the differences between the two. So the 1/500th of a second, I'm managing to freeze the individual snowflakes, so there are still actual dots, and they're representing fine dots and larger dots just depending on the size of the snowflakes. And you can see here that there are a variety of sizes which also add to the beauty of this image, because it does add a little bit of variety inside the shadow areas, as you can see here. Now I'm looking a little bit closer here and I'm thinking right here this might be a circular snowflake that's falling, but all around there, surrounding it, is actually a little streaky. So it leads me to believe that even at 1/500th of a second, the snow was falling down so quickly that it didn't capture it at a frozen state, it actually blurred it just a little bit so that you can see the streaks that the blur has created even at 1/500th of a second. So this just goes to show you how intense and how windy that day was when I was here. I love this dottedness. It almost reminds me of a pointillism technique in painting. It's the fine textures that this dot creates. It's a really beautiful image just because of the snow falling and the intensity of that snowstorm. Now, I'm going to switch back to the 1/30th of a second, and just here, this is exactly where the runner was. Just look at how different this is at 100%. Look at that right there. So now we have the runner in the frame, but you can now see the different texture that the snow actually creates, just because the snow is now blurred and is visible in the shadow and midtone areas, and especially in the runner area as well. So you can see that instead of the dots, it's now completely streaks and blurred lines, almost chaotic in a fashion, just because of the fact that the snow was not falling down vertically, but it was actually falling horizontally and diagonally, just depending on the strength of the wind. You can see how that in this particular area, and actually in the runner area, this snow is actually flying in different directions. So that just goes to show you again the wind gusts that are very intense. And again, I'm looking at 100% here on the 1/30th of a second shutter speed, so you can see all the streaks that it's leaving behind here in the shadow and midtone areas. And I hope you can appreciate the differences that this makes in relative to the original image taken at 1/500th of a second, where it's individual snowflakes that you're looking at. So it's a completely different feel, in my opinion. And depending on what you like or not, it may not be your favorite. You may like the one that's actually the individual snowflakes showing, but I actually do appreciate the different texture that this long exposure creates, and it's just something completely different than the original image. It's right here. And all I did was change the shutter speed from 1/500th of a second to 1/30th of a second. You can create a completely different image just from that one different setting. Now, obviously for this particular long exposure technique, you will have to be able to pick the right scenery. So in this particular case with the snow falling, you're not going to be able to tell any differences from the highlight areas here. If I switch from the original right here, you obviously won't be able to tell in the highlight areas because it's all white. So you do have to pick your scenery carefully and make sure that there are shadows and midtone areas where you can actually appreciate the difference that the shutter speed makes in your image. Now obviously with a long exposure, you're going to either use a tripod or know your limits in being able to handheld your shots. Now these shots, both of them were actually handheld. I did not use my tripod because it was so intense, that storm, that the tripod would probably have blown away, at least the one that I did bring with me, which was that Peak Design travel tripod. So for convenience sake, I just handheld my shots and essentially just held my breath and shoulders to my body to keep it tight, and knocked off a couple of burst shot to produce a 1/30th of a second shot that is sharp everywhere else except for the falling snow. So here's a few other photos that I took during the snowstorm. You can appreciate the intensity of the storm through the images, and I hope you enjoy them. So that's pretty much it for this technique on how I create texture using shutter speed in my winter storm images. I hope this gives you some sort of inspiration on when you go taking photos out in the next winter storm, wherever you may be. And if you do so, please feel free to share with me on Instagram at Smacku, or you can comment on my YouTube video here if you think this is something you may want to do yourself as well. Thanks so much for watching, and I'll see you in the next video.